The scent of death hung heavy in the mountain air, mixing with pine needles and the metallic tang of silver bullets that had already found their mark. Sera Nightshade pressed her trembling hands against the gaping wound in her mother's chest, watching crimson seep through her fingers like water through a broken dam. Elena's breathing came in short, desperate gasps, each one weaker than the last. "Shoo, Mama, don't try to talk," Sera whispered, but even as the words left her lips, she knew they were lies wrapped in hope. The silver had gone too deep, spreading its poison through Elena's werewolf blood like acid through silk. "The healers will come. They have to come." Elena's hand, cold despite the fever burning through her body, pressed something hard and smooth into Sera's palm. The ancient moonstone pendant caught what little light filtered through their cabin's shattered windows, casting ethereal blue shadows across Elena's pale face. Find Darius Blackthorne." Elena's voice was barely a whisper, each word fought for and precious. "Tell him. God help me, tell him you're his daughter." The world seemed to stop spinning. Sera had asked about her father countless times over the years, receiving nothing but sad smiles and gentle deflections. Now, with death stealing the color from her mother's lips, the truth emerged like a blade between the ribs. "Mama, what are you?" "Listen to me." Elena's grip tightened with surprising strength. "The Shadow Pack, they've been hunting us since you were born. Viktor Grimm won't stop until..." Her words dissolved into a coughing fit that painted her lips with blood. "You have to run, baby girl. Run and never look back." The howl started then, a symphony of rage and hunger that made Sera's bones ache with primal terror. They echoed through the forest, getting closer with each passing second. The Shadow Pack had found them. "I can't leave you," Sera choked out, her 16-year-old heart shattering as Elena's eyes began to lose their focus. "Please, Mama, just hold on a little longer." Elena's hand cupped Sera's cheek with the tenderness of 1,000 goodbyes. "You are stronger than you know, my moonbeam. Stronger than the wolf, stronger than the night." Her breath hitched, rattling in her chest. "But never forget, you are also loved." The light faded from Elena's amber eyes like stars winking out at dawn. Sera sat frozen in the sudden, terrible silence, her mother's blood cooling beneath her palms. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush, accompanied by the low growls of wolves who had tasted violence and wanted more. "Move." The word whispered through her mind with Elena's voice. "Run." The front door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and hinges. 3 massive shapes filled the doorway, men who wore their beast just beneath the skin, their eyes glowing yellow in the darkness. The largest of them, a scarred brute with silver threading through his dark hair, stepped into the cabin with the confidence of a predator who had cornered his prey. Well, Viktor Grimm's voice was velvet over steel. Little Elena finally stopped running. His gaze swept over the scene, lingering on Elena's still form before settling on Sera with hungry interest. And she left behind such a pretty gift. Sera's vision went red at the edges. Something deep inside her chest began to burn, not with grief, but with fury that tasted of copper and moonlight. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that seemed to surprise even her. "You killed her." Viktor laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "I put her out of her misery, child. Just as I'll do for you." He gestured to his companions. "Take her alive. The ritual requires her blood to be fresh." That's when Sera moved. She didn't remember making the conscious decision to fight. One moment she was kneeling beside her mother's body, and the next she was airborne, launching herself at the nearest Shadow Pack member with speed that shouldn't have been possible. Her nails, when had they grown so sharp, raked across his throat, opening ribbons of flesh that sprayed arterial crimson across the cabin walls. The man gurgled and fell, clutching his ruined neck. Sera landed in a crouch, her muscles coiled and ready. Around her, the air seemed to shimmer with heat, and she could smell things: fear, excitement, the metallic scent of weapons. Everything was sharper, clearer, as if she'd been living her entire life in a fog that had suddenly lifted. "Impossible," Viktor breathed. "She hasn't even shifted yet." Boss, the third man growled, his hand moving to the silver-plated gun at his hip. She's not just wolf. Look at her eyes. Sera caught her reflection in the broken glass of a picture frame, Elena laughing beside a waterfall, the photo now stained with blood. The girl looking back at her had eyes the color of fresh blood, pupils dilated to pinpoints. Not wolf. Not human. Something else entirely. Viktor's expression shifted from hunger to greed. The hybrid lives. His voice carried a reverence that made Sera's skin crawl. After all these years, the prophecy child still breathes. Before Sera could ask what he meant, instinct screamed at her to move. She dove toward the window as Viktor's companion opened fire, silver bullets chewing through the wooden frame where her head had been a heartbeat before. Glass exploded around her as she crashed through into the night beyond. She hit the ground running, her feet finding purchase on terrain that should have been treacherous in the darkness. But she could see everything, every root, every stone, every shadow that offered concealment. Behind her, Viktor's roar of frustration shattered the silence. Find her. She can't have gone far. Sera ran through the forest like a creature born to it, her heart hammering against her ribs. Branches that should have caught and torn her skin seemed to bend away, as if the forest itself was helping her escape. But she could hear them behind her, paws thundering against earth, the crash of bodies moving through underbrush with predatory purpose. They were gaining ground. Her lungs burned as she crested a hill, and she stumbled to a stop at what lay beyond. Hundreds of lights twinkled in a valley below, arranged in a careful circle around what looked like a massive outdoor gathering. Even from this distance, she could hear voices raised in harmony, singing something that made her bones vibrate with recognition she couldn't name. The Midnight Moon Pack. It had to be. Sera had heard whispers of them over the years, the largest, most powerful pack in North America, led by an Alpha King whose very name made other supernatural beings bow their heads in respect or terror. Elena had always gone quiet when Sera asked about them, but now. Find Darius Blackthorne. With the shadow pack's howls growing closer behind her, Sera half ran, half tumbled down the slope toward the lights. Her legs gave out just as she reached the edge of the gathering, sending her sprawling onto polished stone. The singing stopped abruptly. Sera found herself lying in the center of what appeared to be a sacred bonding ceremony. Hundreds of werewolves surrounded her in concentric circles, their eyes reflecting the light of torches that burned with silver flames. At the far end of the gathering, two people stood on a raised dais, a woman in flowing white and a man whose presence seemed to command the very air around him. The man stepped down from the dais, moving with the fluid grace of a born predator. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that caught the torchlight and eyes the color of storm clouds. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, and when those gray eyes locked onto hers, Sera felt something in her chest recognize him on a level deeper than memory. Alpha King Darius Blackthorne. Her father. Sera struggled to her knees, Elena's blood still coating her hands, and pulled the moonstone pendant from her pocket. It seemed to pulse with inner light as she held it up, and she heard several gasps from the surrounding pack members. My mom died in my arms, Sera said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Tears she hadn't realized she was shedding tracked down her cheeks. They're coming to kill me next. Darius went perfectly still, his eyes locked on the pendant with an expression of such raw pain that Sera almost reached out to comfort him. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Impossible. Elena said she lost the baby. The shadow pack's howls echoed across the valley, closer now, filled with the promise of violence. Around the gathering, pack warriors began to shift, preparing for war. But Sera only had eyes for the man who might be her father, this legendary Alpha King who looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. They killed her, Sera whispered, and watched as something dangerous flickered to life in Darius Blackthorne's storm-gray eyes. If you are enjoying this video, do well to like and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Chapter 2. The council chamber felt like a tomb. Sera sat rigidly in the ornate chair they'd given her, acutely aware of the 12 pairs of eyes dissecting her every breath. The Midnight Moon Pack's governing council surrounded her in a horseshoe formation, their faces carved from stone and disappointment. At the head of the table, Alpha King Darius Blackthorne held Elena's moonstone pendant up to the lamplight, his expression unreadable. "This proves nothing," Elder Marcus growled, his scarred hands flat against the polished wood. "Any rogue could have stolen Elena's pendant. We've seen no verification that this hybrid is anything more than a clever deception." "The girl reeks of Shadow Pack blood," added Councilwoman Vera, her nose wrinkling in distaste. "She could be a spy sent to infiltrate our territory during the bonding ceremony. It would be just like Viktor to use an innocent face to lower our defenses." Sera's hands clenched in her lap, nails digging crescents into her palms. Every instinct screamed at her to defend herself, to prove she belonged here, but the words felt trapped behind the knot of grief still lodged in her throat. She'd watched her mother die less than 2 hours ago, and now these strangers were debating her fate like she was a piece of furniture they couldn't decide whether to keep. "She bears the bloodline mark," Darius said quietly, never taking his eyes off the pendant. "The moonstone responds only to Elena's family." Elder Marcus scoffed. "Parlor tricks. Dark magic can mimic." "Enough." Darius's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, and the room fell silent. He set the pendant down carefully, his storm-gray eyes finally meeting Sera's. "Tell me about your mother. Her favorite song. The scar on her left shoulder. The way she took her coffee." The questions hit Sera like physical blows. She closed her eyes, Elena's voice echoing in her memory. "She hummed Moon River when she was nervous," Sera whispered. "The scar was from a silver blade when she was 17, 3 inches long, shaped like a crescent. And she never drank coffee. Only tea, with honey and mint leaves she grew herself." When Sera opened her eyes, she found Darius staring at her with an expression of such raw pain that her breath caught. Around the table, the council members shifted uncomfortably, sensing the emotional undercurrent they couldn't quite identify. The girl could have learned these details from anyone, Councilwoman Vera insisted, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Hybrids are dangerous, Alpha. They're unstable. Their dual nature makes them prone to madness and—" "My mother wasn't mad," Sera snapped, her composure finally cracking. Heat flooded her veins as anger took hold, and something deep in her chest began to burn. "She was brilliant and kind and stronger than any of you could ever." The words died in her throat as the world suddenly exploded into sensation. Every heartbeat in the room became a thunderclap in her ears. She could smell fear, anger, curiosity, and underneath it all, something that tasted like old grief and buried hope. But worst of all, she could feel them, their emotions crashing over her like waves, threatening to drown her in a sea of foreign feelings. "What's happening to me?" Sera gasped, pressing her palms against her temples as the psychic assault intensified. Darius was beside her in an instant, his large hands covering hers. "Stay calm. Focus on my voice." But the moment his skin touched hers, Sera's world shattered. Images flooded her mind, memories that weren't her own. A younger Darius laughing with a woman whose face was achingly familiar. Elena, radiant and alive, her amber eyes bright with love as she pressed her hand to her still flat belly. "I can feel her, Darius. Our daughter. She's going to be extraordinary." The memory shifted, turned dark. Elena sobbing as she packed a single bag, her hands shaking as she wrote a letter Sera couldn't quite read. "I have to protect her. The prophecy. God help us, what if they're right about what she could become?" Another flash, Darius finding the letter, his anguished roar shaking the very foundations of the pack house. "Find her. Find them both." But the search had turned up nothing except burned wreckage and blood that could have belonged to anyone. Sera wrenched away from Darius's touch, the connection severing with an almost audible snap. The council chamber came back into focus, but everything felt wrong, too bright, too sharp, like someone had adjusted the contrast on reality itself. "You thought we were dead," she whispered, staring at Darius with new understanding. "She left you a letter, but you never found us." The Alpha King went perfectly still. Around the table, the council members leaned forward with sudden interest, sensing that something significant had just shifted in the room's dynamic. How could you possibly know about? I saw it. In your memories. Sera's voice was barely a whisper. When you touched me, I saw everything. The way she looked at you, the way you searched for us, the way you... She swallowed hard. The way you grieved. Elder Marcus shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. Vampire telepathy. She's reading minds without permission. That's a capital offense in pack law. I didn't mean to, Sera protested, but even as the words left her mouth, she could feel something else building inside her. A pressure in her bones, a heat that had nothing to do with anger. Her skin felt too tight, like she was wearing clothes that no longer fit. The transformation hit her without warning. Sera doubled over as her spine began to elongate, bones shifting and grinding with audible pops. Her vision blurred as her senses sharpened to an almost painful degree. She could hear conversations happening 3 floors below, smell the dinner cooking in the pack house kitchen, feel the heartbeats of small creatures moving through the walls. The first shift, someone breathed. She's going wolf. But something was wrong. The change felt incomplete, like her body couldn't decide what it wanted to become. Half-formed claws erupted from her fingertips before retracting. Her teeth ached as canines tried to lengthen, then returned to normal. The world kept sliding in and out of focus as her eyes shifted between human and wolf sight. Help me, Sera gasped, looking up at Darius through the haze of pain. I can't, I don't know how to. The explosion came without warning. The council chamber's windows blew inward in a shower of glass and silver light. Dark shapes poured through the openings, shadow pack warriors in full wolf form, their eyes glowing with predatory hunger. At their head came Viktor Grimm himself, still in human form but radiating menace like heat from a forge. Darius. Viktor's voice carried clearly over the chaos. I've come for what's mine. The Midnight Moon warriors responded instantly, chairs flying as council members shifted into their wolf forms. But Sera barely registered the transformation happening around her. Her incomplete shift had left her senses in overdrive, and she could hear something that made her blood run cold. Children. Crying. Somewhere in the pack house, the little ones were terrified and alone. Without conscious thought, Sera moved. She flowed through the battle like water, her hybrid nature granting her speed that even full werewolves couldn't match. A shadow pack wolf lunged at her, jaws wide, and she twisted away with vampire grace before delivering a blow that sent the creature crashing into the far wall. She didn't know where the fighting skills came from, muscle memory that felt older than her 16 years. She found them in the pack house nursery, 8 children ranging from toddlers to preteens, huddled together while their caretaker, an elderly woman named Beth, tried to shepherd them toward a hidden panic room. 2 shadow pack wolves blocked their path, lips peeled back from yellowed fangs. Get away from them, Sera snarled. The wolves turned toward her with predatory interest, and she caught the scent of fresh blood on their breath. One of the children whimpered, and something inside Sera snapped. She didn't remember crossing the room. One moment she was standing in the doorway, and the next she was tearing through the wolves with a savagery that should have horrified her. Her nails had become claws, not fully wolf, but something sharper, more precise. When she was finished, both creatures lay motionless, their life's blood seeping into the nursery's cheerful yellow carpet. Are you hurt? She asked the children, her voice gentler than it had been moments before. The smallest one, a little girl with pigtails, shook her head. You're bleeding, she whispered, pointing at Sera's arm. Sera looked down to find silver scratches along her forearm, shallow, but burning like brands. When had that happened? The pain felt distant, unimportant compared to the children's safety. But as her blood dripped onto the nursery floor, something extraordinary happened. The wooden boards began to glow with soft silver light, and that radiance spread outward like ripples in a pond. Ancient symbols carved into the pack house's foundation flared to life, creating a protective barrier that made the attacking shadow pack warriors howl in frustration. The wards, Beth breathed, staring at the glowing floor in amazement. They haven't activated in over a century. Before Sera could ask what that meant, footsteps echoed in the hallway behind her. She spun around, claws extended, ready to fight whoever came through that door. Instead, she found herself face to face with the most beautiful woman she'd ever seen. Luna Cassandra was elegant and serene, with silver-streaked blonde hair and the kind of timeless beauty that spoke of both wisdom and power. She wore a simple white dress that had somehow remained pristine despite the battle raging outside, and her green eyes held depths that seemed to see straight through to Sera's soul. "Come with me, child," Cassandra said softly, producing a leather satchel that smelled of herbs and healing magic. "Those wounds need tending. The children will be safe now that the wards are active." "You did that, didn't you?" Cassandra's smile was gentle but knowing. Only one of true bloodline can awaken the ancient protections. Sera found herself following the Luna through corridors that glowed with the same silver light as the nursery floor. The sounds of battle grew distant as they climbed a narrow staircase to what appeared to be Cassandra's private chambers. "Sit," Cassandra instructed, gesturing to a plush chair beside a window that looked out over the Packlands. "Let me see those scratches." As the Luna worked, cleaning the wounds with steady, practiced hands, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "I know what you are, child." Sera's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Your mother saved my life once. 20 years ago, when I was barely more than a girl myself." Cassandra's fingers were gentle as she applied a salve that smelled of moonflowers and starlight. "I was dying from silver poisoning, a hunter's trap that had gone undetected for days. The healers had given up hope." "What did she do?" "Something impossible. Something that should have killed her." Cassandra met Sera's eyes, and her expression was grave. "Elena gave me a blood transfusion. Not wolf blood, witch blood. Magic so pure it burned the silver from my system and left me stronger than I'd ever been." Sera stared at the Luna in confusion. "My mother was a werewolf." "She wasn't. Your mother was the last of the moon witches, child. The last keeper of the old magics that existed before packs and territories divided our kind." Cassandra's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And that makes you something that hasn't been seen in this world for over 300 years. What am I?" Before Cassandra could answer, a commotion outside drew their attention to the window. The battle was over, Sera realized. Shadow Pack warriors were retreating into the forest, but she could see Viktor Grimm standing at the tree line, his scarred face turned toward the pack house. Even at this distance, she could see him speaking to someone, a figure kneeling in the shadows beside him. As Sera watched, Viktor bent down to hear whatever the wounded creature was saying, and his expression shifted from frustration to something that looked like religious ecstasy. "There are others who will kill you for your bloodline," Cassandra warned, her hand tightening on Sera's shoulder. "Others who know what you represent and what power runs in your veins." Viktor straightened suddenly, throwing back his head in a howl that made every wolf in the territory cringe. When the sound faded, his voice carried clearly across the distance between them. "Then we accelerate the ritual," he roared to his retreating pack. "Find me the other 2 bloodlines. The convergence begins at the next new moon." As the shadow pack disappeared into the darkness, Viktor's words echoed in Sera's mind like a curse. She turned to Cassandra, questions tumbling over each other in her desperation for answers. But the Luna's face had gone pale as moonlight, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of ancient prophecy. "The prophecy," Cassandra breathed. "Sweet goddess, help us all. The Moonborn child lives." If you are enjoying this video, do well to like and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Chapter 3. Dawn came too early and with too much pain. Sera groaned as consciousness dragged her from dreams filled with silver fire and Viktor's manic laughter. Every muscle in her body ached from her incomplete transformation, and the scratches on her arm throbbed with a dull, persistent burn that told her the silver hadn't been entirely cleansed from her system. A soft knock at her door made her sit up, wincing at the movement. "Come in." To her surprise, it wasn't Cassandra who entered, but Darius himself. The Alpha King looked like he'd slept about as much as she had, which was to say not at all. His dark hair was disheveled, and there were new lines around his storm-gray eyes that spoke of worry and sleepless planning. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Get dressed. Training starts in 10 minutes. Training? Sera blinked, still trying to shake off the fog of exhaustion. But I thought. You thought wrong. Darius's voice was gentle but implacable. Last night proved you have power, but power without control is dangerous. To yourself and to everyone around you. He paused at the doorway, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Your mother would want you to be safe. After he left, Sera stared at the closed door for a long moment, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. The way he'd said your mother, like the words still caused him physical pain, made something ache deep inside her. She'd spent 16 years wondering about her father, creating elaborate fantasies of the man who'd given her half her DNA. None of those fantasies had included the complex reality of grief and guilt she'd seen in Darius's memories. 20 minutes later, she found herself in a training courtyard behind the pack house, wearing borrowed workout clothes that almost fit. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and dew still clung to the grass beneath her feet. Darius was already there, dressed in simple black clothing that emphasized the predatory grace of his movements. Rule 1, he said without looking at her. Control begins with breathing. Everything else, strength, speed, magic, flows from that foundation. For the next hour, he put her through exercises that were part meditation, part torture. Push-ups until her arms shook, sit-ups until her abs screamed, followed by stillness so complete it felt like drowning in her own heartbeat. Through it all, Darius watched with the intensity of a scientist studying a particularly fascinating specimen. You're holding back, he observed as Sera collapsed after her third set of burpees. Why? I'm not, Sera started to protest, then caught the look in his eyes. It was the same expression Elena used to wear when she knew Sera was lying about having finished her homework. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Last night, when I fought those wolves. I liked it. The violence, the power. What if that makes me like Viktor? Something flickered across Darius's face, surprise, maybe even approval. The fact that you're worried about it means you're nothing like him. He offered her a hand up, and when their fingers touched, Sera felt that same electric recognition she'd experienced in the council chamber. Not the overwhelming flood of his memories this time, just connection. Like puzzle pieces sliding into place. Again, he said, stepping back. And this time, don't apologize for being strong. They were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Sera turned to see a young man jogging toward them, and her breath caught in her throat. He was beautiful in the way that supernatural beings sometimes were, all clean lines and graceful movement, with dark hair that caught the morning light and eyes the color of forest shadows. But it was more than just physical beauty. There was something about the way he moved, the confidence in his stride, that made her pulse quicken. Sorry I'm late, Alpha, the newcomer said, flashing a grin that was equal parts apology and mischief. Council meeting ran long. His gaze shifted to Sera, and she felt heat creep up her neck under the intensity of his attention. You must be our mysterious visitor. Sera, meet Kai Shadow Walker, Darius said, and there was something in his tone that Sera couldn't quite identify. Amusement? Warning? My beta and apparently the pack's unofficial welcoming committee. Kai laughed, extending his hand to Sera. Don't let him fool you. I'm much more charming than he is. When Sera took his hand, she felt a jolt of something. Not the overwhelming psychic connection she'd experienced with Darius, but a warmth that settled in her chest like coming home to a fire on a cold night. Kai will be helping with your training, Darius continued, seemingly oblivious to the way Sera's heart had started doing acrobatics. He's one of our best fighters, and he knows how to work with unusual circumstances. The training that followed was unlike anything Sera had ever experienced. Where Darius was methodical and controlled, Kai was fluid and instinctive. He taught her to move like water, to find the spaces between her opponent's defenses, to turn her hybrid nature into an advantage rather than a liability. Stop thinking so much, he said after she'd overthought a simple defensive maneuver for the third time. Your body knows what to do. Trust it. As the days passed, their training sessions became the highlight of Sera's existence. Kai had a way of making her laugh even when she was exhausted and frustrated, and she found herself looking forward to the moments when he would demonstrate a technique, his hand covering hers to adjust her grip on a practice sword. But it was the quiet moments that affected her most. The way he listened when she talked about Elena, never trying to fix her grief but simply holding space for it. The soft look in his eyes when he thought she wasn't watching. The careful distance he maintained, as if he was afraid of pushing too hard too fast. "He likes you," Cassandra observed one evening as they sat in the Luna's private garden, sharing tea and comfortable silence. "Kai, I mean. Though I suspect you already know that." Sera felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's complicated. The best things usually are." Cassandra set down her cup, her green eyes gentle. "But that's not what you really want to talk about, is it?" It wasn't. For 3 days, Sera had been wrestling with questions that felt too large and dangerous to voice. But sitting here in the moonlight, with the scent of night-blooming jasmine heavy in the air, the words finally spilled out. "Tell me about my mother. The truth this time." Cassandra was quiet for so long that Sera began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of old secrets. "Elena came to us when she was barely 18, pregnant and terrified. She'd been running for months, staying just ahead of something that wanted to use her child for purposes she couldn't fully understand." Cassandra's fingers traced the rim of her teacup. "At first, we thought she was just another rogue wolf seeking sanctuary. But when she went into labor..." "What happened?" "Magic, child. Raw, untamed magic that made the very air sing with power. Elena wasn't just a werewolf, she was the last keeper of the old ways, the final guardian of lunar magic that predates our modern pack structures by millennia." Cassandra met Sera's eyes. "She was a moon witch, and that makes you something that shouldn't exist." The words settled over Sera like a physical weight. "Vampire, werewolf, and witch. The first of your kind in over 3 centuries. And according to the prophecies." Cassandra hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "There's something you need to see." She led Sera through corridors Sera had never explored before, deep into the heart of the pack house where the walls were made of stone and the air smelled of age and secrets. They stopped before a heavy wooden door carved with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the lamplight. "The archive," Cassandra explained, producing an ornate key. "Where we keep the most dangerous knowledge." Inside, the room was lined floor to ceiling with books, scrolls, and artifacts that hummed with barely contained power. Cassandra went directly to a glass case in the center of the room, where an ancient tome lay open to a page covered in illustrations that made Sera's blood run cold. 3 figures stood beneath a blood-red moon, a woman with flames dancing around her fingers, a man whose shadow stretched into dragon wings, and a third figure whose face was obscured but whose hands glowed with silver light. "The prophecy of the Moonborn," Cassandra said quietly. "When the 3 ancient bloodlines converge under a blood moon, they will either usher in a new age of peace, or destroy every supernatural being on Earth." Sera stared at the illustration, recognition stirring in her chest. "The other 2. Viktor mentioned finding them. A phoenix shifter and a dragonborn heir. The Shadow Pack has been hunting them for years, just as they hunted you." Cassandra closed the book carefully. "The next blood moon is in 3 weeks." They walked back to Sera's room in thoughtful silence, but as they reached her door, Cassandra caught her arm. "There's something else you should know. Someone arrived tonight while you were training. He's asking to see you." Sera felt a prickle of unease. "Who?" "A vampire. Says his name is Adrian Nightfall, and that he's your uncle." Before Sera could respond, a voice spoke from the shadows at the end of the hallway. "Hello, niece." The man who stepped into the lamplight was devastatingly handsome in the way that only vampires could be, pale skin that seemed to glow with inner light, dark hair that looked like it had been styled by moonbeams, and eyes the color of fresh blood. He moved with liquid grace, and when he smiled, Sera caught the glint of fangs. "You look just like Elena," Adrian said, and his voice was silk over steel. "Though I suspect you have more of your father's appetites." I don't know you, Sera said, but even as the words left her mouth, something about him felt familiar. The tilt of his head, the way he held his hands, small gestures that echoed Elena's mannerisms. Of course you don't. Elena made sure of that. Adrian's expression darkened. She kept you hidden from everyone who might have protected you. Including the family that loved her. Cassandra stepped protectively closer to Sera. State your business, vampire. My business is with my niece. Adrian's gaze never left Sera's face. I've come to tell her the truth about what happened to Elena. About who really killed her. Viktor killed her, Sera said immediately. I saw him. Viktor pulled the trigger, yes. But who do you think drove Elena to that cabin in the first place? Who made her so desperate to hide that she chose death over discovery? Adrian's smile was cold and sharp. Ask your precious Alpha King about the hunt he organized 17 years ago. Ask him about the orders he gave to bring Elena back, alive or dead. You're lying. But even as Sera said it, doubt crept into her voice. She thought about Darius's memories, the anguish in his face when he'd found Elena's letter. Had there been something else? Something she'd missed? Am I? Adrian stepped closer, and Sera caught the scent of night air and old roses. Ask him, Sera. Ask Darius why Elena was so afraid that she'd rather die than let him find you. Before either Sera or Cassandra could respond, Adrian melted back into the shadows as silently as he'd appeared, leaving only his parting words hanging in the air like poison. The next few days passed in a blur of training and growing confusion. Sera found herself watching Darius more carefully, looking for signs of the ruthlessness Adrian had hinted at. But all she saw was a man carrying the weight of old grief, someone who looked at her with a mixture of wonder and pain that felt too genuine to fake. It was during a full moon run with the pack that everything changed. They moved through the forest like a living river, dozens of wolves flowing between the trees with synchronized grace. Sera ran in her human form, her wolf still refused to emerge completely, but she kept pace easily, her hybrid nature allowing her to match their supernatural speed. Kai ran beside her, his dark gray wolf magnificent in the moonlight. When he looked at her, she felt that warmth in her chest intensify until it became something else entirely. Something that made her skin tingle and her heart race with more than just exertion. They broke away from the main pack without conscious decision, following a deer path that led to a moonlit clearing. When they stopped, both breathing hard from the run, Kai shifted back to human form with fluid grace. Sera, he said, and her name sounded different in his voice. Charged with meaning she was only beginning to understand. I feel it too, she whispered, because she could see the same confusion and wonder in his eyes that must be reflected in her own. This connection between us. What is it? I think you know. Kai stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. I think you've known since the first moment we touched. The mate bond. She'd read about them in the pack's library, but reading was nothing compared to the reality of it, this sense of completion, of finding a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. Kai, she breathed, and then his hands were cupping her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Tell me to stop, he whispered against her lips. Tell me it's too soon, too complicated, and I'll walk away. Instead, she rose on her toes and kissed him. The world exploded into sensation and light. Every nerve ending in her body sang as Kai's arms came around her, pulling her against the solid warmth of his chest. The mate bond snapped into place between them like a rubber band finally released, and Sera gasped at the intensity of it. But as their kiss deepened, something else flooded her consciousness, a vision so vivid and terrible that she wrenched away from Kai with a strangled cry. Blood. So much blood that it painted the ground scarlet beneath her feet. And in the center of it all, Darius lay motionless, his storm-gray eyes staring sightlessly at a sky the color of fresh wounds. Her hands, her own hands, dripped with his blood, and around her, an army of shadow wolves knelt in submission. Viktor's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere, the Moonborn rises, and the old order dies. Sera. Kai's voice seemed to come from very far away. Sera, what's wrong? She found herself on her knees in the clearing, Kai's hands on her shoulders, his face tight with worry. The vision was already fading, but the taste of blood lingered in her mouth like a promise of things to come. "I'm going to kill him," she whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep inside her. "Oh God, Kai. I'm going to kill Darius." If you are enjoying this video, do well to like and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Chapter 4. Sleep became Sera's enemy. Every time she closed her eyes, the vision returned, Darius's lifeless body, her blood-stained hands, the army of shadow wolves bowing at her feet. She'd taken to walking the pack house corridors at night, hoping exhaustion would eventually claim her without dreams. It was during one of these midnight wanderings that Adrian found her. "Troubled sleep, niece?" His voice emerged from the shadows near the library, smooth as aged whiskey and twice as dangerous. "Perhaps I can help with that." Sera spun toward him, her heart hammering. In the moonlight filtering through tall windows, Adrian looked like something carved from marble and moonbeams. Beautiful. Deadly. Familiar in ways that made her chest ache with longing for a family she'd never known. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, glancing toward the staircase that led to the Alpha's quarters. "If Darius finds you, he'll what? Kill me like he killed my sister?" Adrian stepped into the light, and Sera saw something she'd missed before, genuine grief etched in the lines around his blood-red eyes. "Elena was all I had left, Sera. The last of our bloodline. And he took her from me. You don't know what you're talking about." But even as she said it, doubt crept through her voice like poison through water. The vision had felt so real, so inevitable. What if Adrian was right? What if the growing love she felt for her pack family was built on lies? "Don't I?" Adrian moved closer, pulling something from his coat, a leather portfolio that looked ancient and worn. "I've spent 17 years gathering evidence, following the trail your father tried so hard to cover." Against her better judgment, Sera found herself looking at the documents he spread across a nearby table. Official reports with Darius's signature. Witness statements describing a manhunt that had lasted for months. Financial records showing payments to trackers and bounty hunters. "He mobilized half the continent looking for Elena," Adrian said quietly. "The orders were explicit: bring back the Moon Witch and her hybrid child. Alive if possible, but dead if necessary." The words hit Sera like physical blows. She remembered Darius's anguish in the memories she'd accidentally absorbed, but these documents painted a different picture, not a grieving mate searching for his lost love, but a ruler determined to reclaim what he saw as his property. "Why are you showing me this?" Sera's voice was barely a whisper. "Because you deserve the truth. Because Elena died believing no one would ever tell you what really happened." Adrian's hand settled on her shoulder, cold comfort that somehow felt more honest than all of Darius's warm reassurances. "And because you have a choice to make." "What kind of choice?" Adrian's smile was sharp as a blade. "You can continue playing the dutiful daughter to the man who hunted your mother to her grave. Or you can let me teach you to be what you really are, not just a hybrid, but a force of nature. Powerful enough to make him pay for what he did." The offer hung between them like a loaded weapon. Sera thought of Kai, of the mate bond that sang in her veins even now, of Cassandra's kindness and the pack children she'd risked her life to protect. But she also thought of Elena's terror-filled last moments, of the way her mother had looked over her shoulder for 17 years, always running from something. "What would you teach me?" she found herself asking. "Vampire magic. The old ways that predate werewolf traditions by millennia." Adrian's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Speed that makes you untouchable. Mental abilities that could shatter a mind from across a room. Blood magic that could bring down an Alpha King and everything he's built. I don't want to hurt innocent people. Neither did I, once. But innocence is a luxury we can't afford when we're surrounded by predators." Adrian closed the portfolio with a decisive snap. "Meet me tomorrow night. The old cemetery on the east border. I'll show you what real power feels like." He melted back into shadows before Sera could respond, leaving her alone with documents that painted her new family in shades of deception and blood. The next day's training with Darius felt different, tainted by Adrian's revelations. Every encouraging word felt like manipulation. Every proud look felt like guilt wearing a mask. When Darius adjusted her stance during sword work, Sera found herself pulling away from his touch. "Something's bothering you," he observed, lowering his practice blade. "Want to talk about it? Did you hunt my mother like an animal?" The question burned on her tongue, but she couldn't force it past her lips. Not here, not with pack members watching from the sidelines. Not when she didn't know who she could trust. "Just tired," she lied. "The nightmares are getting worse." Something flickered in Darius's storm-gray eyes, understanding, maybe even guilt. "Your mother had nightmares too, especially near the end. Visions of things that might come to pass." He set his sword aside, his full attention focused on her. "What do you see when you dream?" The truth clawed at her throat, but Sera swallowed it down. "Nothing important. Just shadows and blood." It was Kai who found her that evening, sitting alone in her room as darkness fell beyond her window. He knocked softly before entering, and the sight of him made her chest tight with conflicting emotions. How could she feel this deep, bone-deep connection to someone when everything else in her life might be built on lies? "You've been avoiding me," he said without preamble, settling into the chair across from her bed. "Since the vision in the forest." "What did you see, Sera?" She wanted to tell him everything, about the blood, the prophecy, Adrian's accusations. But the words stuck in her throat like thorns. Instead, she reached for him, pulling him down beside her on the narrow bed. "Hold me," she whispered. "Please. Just for a little while." Kai's arms came around her without hesitation, solid and warm and real in a way that made her want to cry. This was what she'd be giving up if Adrian was right. This sense of belonging, of being cherished and protected. Could she trade it all for the cold comfort of revenge? "Whatever you're thinking," Kai murmured against her hair, "we'll figure it out together. That's what mates do." The word hit her like a slap. Mates. Bound by forces older than civilization, tied together by bonds that transcended death itself. How could she be planning to train with Adrian when every cell in her body screamed that this man was her other half? But as she drifted off in Kai's arms, Elena's dying words echoed in her mind. "You are stronger than the wolf, stronger than the night." Maybe being strong meant making the hard choices, even when they broke your heart. The cemetery was older than the pack house, filled with weathered headstones that leaned at drunken angles beneath gnarled oak trees. Sera found Adrian waiting by a mausoleum whose carved angels had long since lost their faces to time and weather. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, but his smile suggested he'd never doubted it for a moment. "Show me," Sera said without preamble. "Show me what you promised." What followed was unlike any training she'd experienced with Darius or Kai. Where they had focused on control and discipline, Adrian taught her to embrace the chaos of her nature. He showed her how to move faster than thought, how to read minds without touching, how to project her will into the world like a physical force. "Feel the hunger," he instructed as she practiced draining energy from the plants around them. "Don't apologize for what you are. The vampire in you doesn't want balance, it wants dominance." By the end of the session, Sera felt drunk on power. The cemetery plants had withered where she'd touched them, and the very air seemed to bend around her will. But underneath the intoxication was something else, a hollow coldness that made her think of winter mornings and empty rooms. "How does it feel?" Adrian asked as they prepared to part ways. "Wrong," Sera admitted. "Like I'm becoming something I don't recognize." "That's just the werewolf side of you resisting change. Give it time." Adrian's hand brushed her cheek with surprising gentleness. Elena felt the same way when she first embraced her true nature. But power requires sacrifice, niece. The question is whether you're strong enough to pay the price. The training sessions continued for 3 nights, each one pushing Sera further from the girl who'd arrived at the pack house terrified and alone. She learned to cloud minds, to move through shadows like they were doorways, to taste emotions on the wind. But with each lesson, the coldness inside her grew. It was the guilt that finally drove her to search for the truth. Darius's private study was off-limits to everyone except pack leadership, but Sera's new abilities made locks and wards seem like children's toys. She slipped inside during the day while he was handling pack business, her heart hammering as she began going through his personal effects. She found Elena's journal in the bottom drawer of his desk, wrapped in silk and smelling faintly of the moonflowers her mother had loved. Sera's hands shook as she opened it, afraid of what secrets might spill out onto the page. Day 347, the visions are getting stronger. I see her standing in fire, her hands glowing with power that could reshape the world. But in some futures, she's saving lives. In others, God help me, in others she's ending them. Sera flipped through pages of her mother's elegant handwriting, finding entry after entry that painted a picture of a woman torn between love and terror. Elena hadn't left because Darius was hunting her, she'd left because she'd seen what Sera might become. Day 401, the prophecy speaks of choice, but what choice do you give a child born to either save or damn the world? How do I tell Darius that our daughter might be the weapon that destroys everything he's built? Day 428, I have to leave. The Moon Witch bloodline carries too much power, too much temptation. If I stay, if I let her grow up surrounded by pack politics and territorial disputes, she'll learn to see power as the answer to every problem. She needs to understand love before she understands dominance. Day 445, Darius came to me in dreams again last night. I can feel him searching, feel his pain like a physical ache in my chest. But I can't go back. Not when I've seen what happens if I do. The entries continued for pages, each one revealing more of Elena's internal struggle. But as Sera neared the end of the journal, she found something that made her blood run cold. The final entries had been torn out, leaving only jagged paper edges and the ghost of words pressed into the page below. She was trying to decipher those ghostly impressions when the alarm bells began to ring. The pack house erupted into chaos as warriors scrambled to defensive positions. Through the study window, Sera could see figures in tactical gear moving through the forest, humans, but armed with weapons that glowed with unnatural light. Hunters. Sera abandoned the journal and ran for the main hall, where she found Darius barking orders to his lieutenants. When he saw her, relief flickered across his features. Thank God. I thought, he broke off as explosions shook the building. They're using silver-based explosives. Everyone to the safe rooms, now. I'm not hiding, Sera said, and was surprised by the steel in her own voice. These people are here because of me, aren't they? Because of what I am? Before Darius could answer, the windows along the east wall exploded inward. Dark figures poured through the openings, moving with military precision and carrying weapons that hummed with deadly energy. At their head walked a man whose face was achingly familiar, sharp cheekbones and amber eyes that could have belonged to Elena. Hello, sister, the man said, though his gaze was fixed on Sera with an intensity that made her skin crawl. It's been a long time. Matthias, Darius growled, and Sera heard 17 years of hatred in that single word. Elena's brother. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Elena hadn't just been running from prophecies and pack politics, she'd been running from her own family. From humans who saw supernatural beings as abominations to be cleansed from the world. I've come for the hybrid, Matthias announced, raising a weapon that looked like a crossbow mated with a lightning rod. The bloodlines end tonight. The battle that followed was swift and brutal. Pack warriors fought with tooth and claw against humans armed with technology that turned supernatural strengths into weaknesses. Silver nets that drained werewolf energy. Sound weapons that disrupted vampire speed. Chemical compounds that neutralized witch magic. Sera found herself back-to-back with Kai, fighting desperately as hunters closed in around them. But they were outmatched, outgunned, and running out of space to retreat. That's when she saw the net. It flew through the air like a silver spiderweb, aimed directly at her chest. Time seemed to slow as Sera realized she couldn't dodge it, couldn't escape the bonds that would leave her helpless before Matthias's weapons. But Kai could move faster. He threw himself between Sera and the net without hesitation, his body taking the full force of the silver mesh. Sera watched in horror as the metal bit into his skin, watched him convulse as electricity designed to subdue supernatural beings coursed through his nervous system. Kai! She lunged toward him, but hunters were already dragging him away, his body limp and unresponsive in their grip. As they reached the broken windows, Kai's eyes found hers across the chaos. His lips moved, forming words she could barely hear over the sounds of battle. I love you. Then he was gone, disappeared into the darkness beyond the pack house walls. The first bloodline is secured, Matthias announced, his voice carrying over the dying sounds of combat. 2 more to go. As the hunters retreated with their prize, Sera felt something break inside her chest, not just her heart, but something deeper. The mate bond that had felt so right, so perfect, was now a jagged wound that poured pain into every breath. We'll get him back, Darius said, appearing at her side with blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. I promise you, we'll. Don't. The word came out harder than Sera had intended. Don't make promises you can't keep. She turned away from him, from the pack members gathering to tend their wounded, and found Adrian waiting in the shadows by the door. His red eyes gleamed with something that might have been sympathy. Now you see, he said softly. This is what happens when you try to build a life on other people's foundations. They crumble, and everything you love gets buried in the rubble. What do you want? Sera's voice was empty, drained of everything except exhaustion. To give you the power to save him. To make them all pay for what they've taken. Adrian extended his hand, pale fingers unmarked by the battle that had just raged. Come with me, niece. Let me show you what real vengeance looks like. Sera stared at his outstretched hand, thinking of Kai's face as the hunters dragged him away. Thinking of Elena's journal and its missing pages. Thinking of the vision that haunted her dreams, Darius dead, an army of shadow wolves at her feet. Maybe it was time to stop running from destiny and start embracing it. But as she reached for Adrian's hand, his smile shifted into something cold and predatory. Actually, he said, dropping his mask entirely, I think we've played this game long enough. The truth hit her like ice water. You're not my uncle. Clever girl. Though it took you long enough to figure it out. Adrian's form began to shimmer and change, revealing features that were sharper, more angular. More familiar. Viktor sends his regards. Before Sera could move, could scream, could do anything except stare in horror, Adrian lunged for her with inhuman speed. But the betrayal, the rage, the loss of Kai, it all combined into something that transcended thought or control. Sera screamed. The sound that tore from her throat wasn't entirely human. It carried the howl of wolves, the shriek of hunting vampires, and something else, something older and more powerful than either. Every window in the pack house exploded outward in a shower of crystal and silver light. Ancient symbols blazed to life along Sera's arms and throat, glowing with power that made the very air crackle. Adrian, Viktor's spy, Viktor's creature, was flung backward by the force of her fury, slamming into the far wall with bone-crushing impact. As consciousness fled, Sera's last thought was crystalline in its clarity. She was done being manipulated, done being anyone's weapon or victim. It was time to become what the prophecy had always intended, the Moonborn, rising at last. If you are enjoying this video, do well to like and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Chapter 5. Sera woke to the smell of smoke and cinnamon. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. The scents were warm and comforting in a way that reminded her of Elena's kitchen on winter mornings. But as consciousness fully returned, she realized the smoke wasn't from a fireplace. It was coming from the person sitting beside her bed. A young woman with flame-red hair that seemed to move with a life of its own turned at the sound of Sera's stirring. Her eyes were the color of molten gold, and when she smiled, Sera caught the flicker of actual fire dancing along her fingertips. About time you woke up, sleeping beauty, the stranger said, her voice carrying a slight accent that sounded like distant thunder. I was starting to think you'd gone into a supernatural coma. Sera tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her body felt like she'd been hit by a freight train made of lightning and bad decisions. Every muscle ached, and there was a strange tingling sensation along her arms where the ancient symbols had appeared. How long was I out? She managed, her voice rusty from disuse. 3 days. You've been muttering in languages that don't exist and occasionally setting things on fire with your mind. The redhead gestured to a stack of books on the nightstand that bore scorch marks. I'm Phoenix Emberheart, by the way. And before you ask, yes, I'm one of the other bloodlines Viktor's been hunting. The name hit Sera like a physical blow, bringing everything rushing back. Adrian's betrayal. Kai's capture. The explosion of power that had felt like tearing herself apart from the inside out. Kai, she whispered, trying again to sit up. They took him. I have to. Easy there, hybrid girl. Phoenix's hand on her shoulder was surprisingly gentle, though Sera could feel the heat radiating from her palm. Your mate's still alive. I can sense him through the bloodline connection. All 3 of us are linked now, whether we like it or not. 3 of us? Phoenix's expression darkened. Me, you, and Zane's steel claw. The Dragon Prince. Though calling him a prince might be generous at this point, considering Viktor's had him for 6 months. Sera finally managed to push herself upright, studying the young woman who claimed to share her destiny. Phoenix was beautiful in a wild, untamed way, all sharp angles and restless energy, like a flame given human form. But there was something brittle underneath the bravado, a carefully controlled desperation that Sera recognized from her own mirror. How did you find me? Sera asked. I didn't. I was running from a pack of Viktor's goons when the whole forest lit up like a Christmas tree 3 nights ago. Phoenix gestured toward the window, where Sera could see scorch marks on the trees beyond the pack house grounds. Your little light show could be seen for miles. Figured it was either the end of the world or someone like me having a really bad day. Someone like you? Phoenix shifter. Last of my kind, if Viktor has his way. Phoenix's hands clenched, and small flames danced between her fingers. My clan has been guarding the flame of creation for over 1,000 years. Viktor wants that flame for his ritual. Wants to use it to forge the 3 bloodlines into something else. The word sent ice through Sera's veins despite the warmth Phoenix radiated. What kind of something else? The kind that could remake the world according to one madman's vision. Phoenix stood abruptly, pacing to the window like a caged tiger. Look, I know we just met, and I know you're probably still processing the whole, your uncle was actually your enemy's spy, thing. But we don't have time for a feeling circle. Viktor has 2 of the 3 bloodlines now, the new moon is tomorrow night, and if we don't stop him, the world ends. Sera finished, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. Her knees wobbled, but she forced herself to stand. I get it. But I'm not leaving without Kai. Good. Phoenix's smile was sharp and dangerous. Because I wasn't planning to leave without Zane either. Guess that means we're going to war. An hour later, Sera found herself in the pack house's war room, surrounded by maps and battle plans that all looked equally impossible. Darius stood at the head of the table, his face grim as he outlined Viktor's fortress for what felt like the 100th time. The Shadow Pack stronghold is built into the side of Mount Grief, he was saying, pointing to a location marked in red on the largest map. It's carved from black stone and warded against every form of supernatural entry we know of. Getting in will be hard. Getting out alive will be harder. What about getting out with 2 prisoners who've been tortured and possibly brainwashed? Phoenix asked, her tone deceptively casual. Because that's what we're really talking about here. The war room fell silent. Around the table, pack warriors shifted uncomfortably, their expressions ranging from doubtful to openly pessimistic. Finally, Cassandra spoke from her position near the door. The fortress isn't just a prison, she said quietly. It's designed to drain magical beings of their power, to weaken them until they're completely dependent on Viktor's will. Every day Kai and Zane remain there, they become less themselves and more his. Sera felt something cold settle in her stomach. How long before the process is irreversible? For most supernatural beings? A week, maybe 2. Cassandra's green eyes were filled with sympathy. But for bloodline descendants, especially ones as powerful as Zane. He could have been completely turned months ago, Phoenix finished, her voice flat. We might not be rescuing him. We might be walking into a trap. We're going anyway. Sera's words carried a finality that surprised even her. I don't care if it's a trap. I don't care if the odds are impossible. Viktor has something that belongs to me, and I'm taking it back. Darius studied her with those storm-gray eyes that had seen centuries of war and loss. This isn't about revenge, Sera. This is about preventing the end of everything we know. If you go in there angry, if you let emotion cloud your judgment. Then what? Sera turned to face him fully, and she saw him flinch at whatever he saw in her expression. You think I should be calm about this? Rational? My mate is being tortured by the psychopath who's been hunting me since birth, and you want me to approach this like a chess game? I want you to approach this like someone who understands that losing control could doom us all. Darius's voice was gentle but implacable. The power you displayed 3 days ago. Sera, you nearly brought down half the mountain. If that happens again in Viktor's fortress, with Kai and Zane in the blast radius. The implication hung in the air like poison. Sera closed her eyes, trying to find the center of calm that Darius had taught her during their training sessions. But all she could see was Kai's face as the hunters dragged him away, the way he'd mouthed, "I love you," like it might be the last thing he'd ever say to her. I can control it, she said finally. I have to be able to control it. Control is good, Phoenix said, moving to stand beside Sera. But sometimes what the situation calls for isn't control. Sometimes it calls for controlled chaos. She grinned, and flames danced in her golden eyes. Lucky for you, chaos is my specialty. The rescue mission launched at midnight under a starless sky. They moved in 2 groups, a strike team led by Darius that would create a distraction at the fortress's main entrance, and a smaller infiltration unit consisting of Sera, Phoenix, and 3 of the pack's best stealth fighters. The plan was simple in concept and terrifying in execution: get in, find the prisoners, get out before Viktor realized what was happening. Of course, plans rarely survived first contact with reality. They were halfway up the mountain when Phoenix suddenly stopped, her head tilted like she was listening to something only she could hear. Zane, she breathed. I can feel him. He's... God, what has Viktor done to him? What do you mean? Sera whispered, but Phoenix was already moving, following some instinct that pulled her away from their planned route. They found themselves at a narrow ledge that overlooked a courtyard carved into the mountain stone. Below them, figures moved in the dim light of torches, shadow-packed guards and something else. Someone else. Sera's breath caught as she recognized the young man chained to a post in the courtyard center. Even from this distance, she could see that Zane's steel claw was devastatingly handsome, tall and lean with the kind of aristocratic features that spoke of ancient bloodlines and old money. His dark hair caught the torchlight, and when he lifted his head, she caught the glint of scales along his throat that marked him as dragonborn. But his eyes were wrong. Empty. Like windows into a room where no one lived anymore. He's been completely turned, Phoenix said, her voice breaking. Viktor's made him into a puppet. Can it be reversed? One of the pack warriors asked. I don't know. Phoenix wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving small scorch marks on her cheeks. I don't know if there's enough of him left to save. They moved deeper into the fortress, following corridors that seemed designed to confuse and disorient. The walls were carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly, and the air itself felt thick with malevolent magic. Sera's hybrid senses were in overdrive, picking up scents and sounds that painted a picture of suffering and despair. It was in Viktor's private chambers that she found them, the missing pages from Elena's journal. They were spread across an ornate desk like trophies, Elena's elegant handwriting now faded and stained with what looked suspiciously like blood. With trembling fingers, Sera began to read. Day 467, he found me. I don't know how, but Viktor tracked me to the safe house in Montana. He says he won't hurt me if I come back willingly, if I accept the mating bond that was arranged when we were children. But I can see the madness in his eyes, the obsession that's consumed him since I ran. Day 470, he's not just hunting me for revenge. He's hunting me because of what Sera could become. He wants to use our daughter, wants to breed her like livestock to create an army of hybrid soldiers. He thinks if he can control the 3 bloodlines, he can reshape the supernatural world in his image. Day 473, Darius came for me tonight. My beautiful, brave mate broke through Viktor's guards and offered to help me disappear completely. But Viktor's reach is long, and his resources are vast. There's nowhere in this world we could hide that he wouldn't eventually find us. Day 475, I've made my choice. If I can't run forever, and I can't fight him directly, then I'll have to remove myself from the equation entirely. Darius doesn't understand, he thinks love is enough to keep us safe. But sometimes love means making the choice that breaks your heart. Final entry, I'm going to fake our deaths, mine and Sera's. Darius will grieve, but he'll live. Viktor will stop hunting, believing his obsession died with me. And Sera will grow up free, never knowing the burden of her bloodline until she's strong enough to bear it. It's the only way to keep her safe from the monster who should have been her protector. If you're reading this, Viktor, know that I chose death over you. I chose freedom over your cage. And if my daughter ever finds these words, I pray she'll understand that everything I did was for love. Sera stared at the pages through tears. She hadn't realized she was crying. Elena hadn't left because she was afraid of Darius, she'd left because she was afraid for him. Afraid of what Viktor would do to the man she loved and the daughter she'd die to protect. Sera. Phoenix's urgent whisper broke through her grief. We found them. They were in a chamber deep in the fortress's heart, a place where the stone walls wept with condensed despair and the air tasted of broken dreams. Kai hung from silver chains that had burned deep grooves into his wrists, his head lolling forward in unconsciousness. But it was the stillness of his chest that made Sera's heart stop. Is he alive? Barely. Phoenix was already working on Zane's bonds, her flames carefully controlled to melt the metal without burning him. But Sera, there's something you need to know about these chains. They're not just restraints, they're conduits. Viktor's been using them to pour his will directly into their minds. As if summoned by his name, Viktor's voice echoed through the chamber from hidden speakers. Welcome to my home, little Moonborn. I trust you're enjoying the reunion? Sera spun around, looking for the source of the voice, her newly awakened power crackling along her skin like contained lightning. Show yourself, you coward. Viktor's laughter was like breaking glass. All in good time. First, I want you to see what I've accomplished. The torches around the chamber flared brighter, revealing the full horror of what he'd done. Kai's eyes opened at the sound, but they were as empty as Zane's had been in the courtyard. When he looked at Sera, there was no recognition, no love, just the blank obedience of a broken mind. Hello, mate, he said in a voice that was his but somehow wasn't. Viktor's been waiting for you. Phoenix had freed Zane, but the dragon prince stood like a statue, awaiting orders from a master who'd hollowed out his soul and filled it with poison. Both men, these powerful, beautiful, dangerous men, had been reduced to extensions of Viktor's will. The ritual begins at moonset, Viktor's voice continued. And you, my dear Sera, are going to help me become something this world has never seen. A god among supernatural beings, with the power to reshape reality itself. As they fought their way out of the fortress with their rescued but compromised allies, Sera realized the true scope of Viktor's plan. He hadn't just captured Kai and Zane, he'd turned them into living weapons, programmed to ensure the bloodlines would submit to his will when the time came. The new moon was tomorrow night, and Viktor didn't just want to control the 3 bloodlines. He wanted to merge with them and become something beyond mortal comprehension. As they reached the safety of the pack lands with dawn breaking behind them, Sera looked at Kai, her mate, her heart, her other half, and saw a stranger wearing his face. The hardest battle wasn't behind them. It was just beginning. If you are enjoying this video, do well to like and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Chapter 6. The pack house had never felt like a prison before. Sera paced the length of her room for what felt like the 1000th time, her hybrid senses picking up every sound from the floors below. Pack members moving with careful, quiet steps. Hushed conversations that stopped whenever she approached. And underneath it all, the steady heartbeat of the man who wore her mate's face but carried a stranger's soul. Kai sat in the chair by her window, perfectly still except for the occasional tremor that ran through his hands. He'd been like this for hours, silent, motionless, fighting a war that no one else could see. "The sun's setting," he said without looking at her, his voice carrying an odd, mechanical quality that made her skin crawl. "Viktor's forces will move soon." "How do you know that?" Sera stopped pacing, studying his profile in the dying light. "Because I can hear him." Kai's jaw clenched, and for a moment, something familiar flickered in his forest green eyes. "God help me, Sera, I can hear his voice in my head, telling me what to think, what to feel, what to..." He cut himself off with a strangled sound, his hands flying to his temples as his body went rigid. When he looked at her again, the warmth was gone from his expression, replaced by cold calculation. "You should eat," he said in that same mechanical tone. "You'll need your strength for what's coming." "Kai." Sera moved toward him slowly, the way she might approach a wounded animal. "Fight it. I know you're still in there. I can feel it through our bond." "Can you?" His smile was sharp and humorless. "Or is that just wishful thinking? Maybe what you're feeling is exactly what Viktor wants you to feel." The words hit her like physical blows, but underneath the cruelty, she caught something else, a flash of anguish so deep it nearly brought her to her knees. The real Kai was still fighting, still struggling against the chains Viktor had wrapped around his mind. "Stay away from me," he whispered suddenly, his voice breaking. "Please, Sera." I can feel him pushing, trying to make me, his features twisted in pain. "I won't be able to stop myself much longer." Before she could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Darius entered without waiting for permission, his storm-gray eyes taking in the scene with practiced assessment. "We need to talk," he said to Sera, then looked at Kai. "All of us." They gathered in Cassandra's private study, Sera, Darius, the Luna, and Phoenix, who'd been trying unsuccessfully to reach Zane through the Dragon Prince's mental barriers. Kai sat apart from the group, his hands folded carefully in his lap like a child trying to be good. "Viktor's moving faster than we anticipated," Darius began without preamble. "Our scouts report massive troop movements around the fortress. He's calling in debts from every dark corner of the supernatural world." "How long do we have?" Phoenix asked, flames dancing nervously around her fingers. "Hours, maybe less." Darius's expression was grim. "The new moon reaches its peak at midnight. If we're going to stop this ritual, we need to move now." "With what army?" Phoenix's laugh was bitter. "Half your pack is injured from the last attack, Zane's completely gone, and Kai," she gestured helplessly at the beta, who was staring at nothing with empty eyes. "We're not exactly at fighting strength here. There might be another way." Sera had been thinking about this ever since they'd returned from the fortress, turning possibilities over in her mind like stones. Zane said something yesterday, during one of his lucid moments. About the bloodlines bonding willingly instead of being forced together. Cassandra leaned forward, interest sharpening her features. "What exactly did he say?" "That if the three bloodlines merged by choice instead of compulsion, we could direct the power ourselves instead of letting Viktor control it." Sera looked around the room, seeing understanding dawn on their faces. "We could turn his own ritual against him." "The magical theory is sound," Darius said slowly. "But the risks are enormous," Cassandra finished. "That kind of bond isn't just magical, Sera. It's spiritual, emotional, permanent. You'd be linking your very essence to Phoenix and Zane for eternity. There would be no going back, no changing your mind if..." "If what?" Sera's voice was sharper than she'd intended. "If I decide I want a normal life? If I want to pretend I'm not a walking prophecy?" She gestured toward Kai, who hadn't moved or spoken since they'd entered the room. "Look at him, Cassandra. Look at what Viktor's done to the man I love. If bonding with Phoenix and Zane can save him, can save everyone, then that's what I'll do." It would mean giving up the mate bond, Phoenix said quietly. The three-way magical connection would override everything else. You'd still care about Kai, but you wouldn't be bound to him the way you are now. The love would become something else. Something diluted. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sera closed her eyes, feeling the mate bond pulse weakly between her and Kai, a connection that had felt like coming home, like finding a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. Could she really give that up? Trade the promise of a lifetime with her soulmate for the power to save the world? There's something else you need to know, Darius said suddenly. His voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room turn toward him. About your mother. About the night she died. Sera's breath caught. What about it? Elena didn't just run to protect you from Viktor's obsession. She ran because she knew what you might become. Darius's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. The prophecy doesn't just speak of three bloodlines converging. It speaks of choice, salvation or destruction, determined by the heart of the Moonborn child. You're saying I could destroy the world instead of saving it. I'm saying your mother believed that was possible. The night she died, she was attempting a blood ritual of her own, one designed to break the prophecy entirely by sacrificing her life and severing your connection to the other bloodlines. Darius's voice broke slightly. Viktor found her before she could complete it. He killed her not just for revenge, but to ensure the prophecy would remain intact. The revelation hit Sera like ice water. Elena hadn't just died to protect her, she died trying to free her from a destiny that could damn them all. So what you're telling me, Phoenix said, her voice carefully controlled, is that bonding with Sera could either save the world or end it, depending on what's in her heart when the magic takes hold. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Darius met Sera's eyes. The question is, do you trust yourself with that kind of power? Before Sera could answer, alarms began ringing throughout the pack house. Through the study windows, she could see lights moving in the forest, torches and magical fire, advancing in organized formations. Viktor's forces, Cassandra breathed. They're here. The next hour was chaos incarnate. Pack warriors took defensive positions while civilians were evacuated to hidden bunkers deep in the mountain. Sera found herself armed with silver-edged weapons she barely knew how to use, standing beside fighters who looked at her with mixtures of hope and terror. It was Phoenix who made the choice that changed everything. They were defending the pack house's eastern approach when shadow pack wolves broke through the outer perimeter. Sera watched in horror as Viktor's forces swept toward them like a dark tide, knowing they were outnumbered 3-1. We need to fall back, she called to Phoenix, who was laying down walls of fire to slow the enemy advance. No. Phoenix's voice was strangely calm as flames danced around her like living things. There's another way. What are you? Phoenix turned to her, and Sera saw something in her golden eyes that made her blood run cold. Resolution. Sacrifice. The look of someone who'd already made an impossible choice. The prophecy has a loophole, Phoenix said, raising her voice over the sounds of battle. Love changes everything. Remember that. Before Sera could stop her, Phoenix stepped out from behind their cover and raised her hands toward the sky. Fire erupted from her body in a column of light that could be seen for miles, a beacon that drew every shadow pack warrior's attention like moths to a flame. Phoenix, no. But it was too late. Viktor's forces converged on the Phoenix shifter like a pack of starving wolves. Phoenix fought with the fury of her namesake, but she was one against dozens. When the silver nets finally brought her down, her defiant laughter echoed across the battlefield. Tell Viktor I'm ready for his ritual, she called as they dragged her away. Tell him the Phoenix rises only to burn brighter. As Viktor's forces retreated with their prize, Sera felt something tear inside her chest, not physical pain, but the severing of a connection she'd barely had time to understand. Through the bloodline bond, she could feel Phoenix's anguish, her terror, her desperate hope that her sacrifice would be enough. She bought us time, Darius said quietly, appearing at Sera's side. But not much. Viktor has 2 of the 3 bloodlines now. He can begin the ritual whenever he chooses. Then we go after her. With what? Half our fighters are wounded, and Viktor's expecting us now. It would be suicide. Darius put a hand on her shoulder. Sera, I know you care about Phoenix, but it's not just about caring. Sera pulled away from his touch, her hybrid senses picking up something that made her turn toward the pack house. I can feel her pain through the bloodline connection. Every second Viktor has her, she's suffering. And there's something else. What? Zane. Sera's eyes widened as understanding hit her. Phoenix's capture did something to him. The shock of losing her, it's breaking Viktor's hold. They found the Dragon Prince in the pack house's great room, doubled over in a chair as his body shook with violent tremors. But when he looked up at their approach, his eyes, for the first time since his rescue, were his own. Sera. Zane's voice was rough, like he'd been screaming. Phoenix. I can feel her. Viktor has her at the ritual site. Where? Sera knelt beside him, careful not to touch him directly. She'd learned that her hybrid magic could be unpredictable around other supernatural beings. The old stone circle on Mount Grief's summit. He's God, what he's doing to her. Zane's hands clenched into fists. He's not just preparing for the ritual. He's using her power to fuel something else. Something that will make the forced bonding irreversible. How long do we have? The new moon reaches its peak in 2 hours. Zane struggled to his feet, power crackling around him like contained lightning. But Sera, there's something you need to understand about the ritual. Viktor isn't just trying to merge with our bloodlines. He's trying to replace them entirely, to become the sole source of our power while we become extensions of his will. Then we stop him. Sera's voice carried a finality that surprised even her. We bond willingly, the three of us, and we turn his own magic against him. It won't work without Phoenix. The bond requires all 3 bloodlines to be present and willing. Zane's expression was grim. And even if we could reach her, even if we could free her from Viktor's control, the ritual would change us all. We'd become something new, something that's never existed before. Something that could save the world or destroy it, Sera finished, remembering Darius's words. I know. The question is, are you willing to take that risk? Zane studied her for a long moment, dragon gold eyes searching her face. Are you? Before Sera could answer, a familiar voice spoke from the doorway behind them. She doesn't have to. Sera spun around to find Kai standing in the entrance to the great room, but something was different about him. The mechanical stiffness was gone, replaced by a predatory grace that made her hybrid instincts scream danger. Kai. She took a step toward him, then stopped as she caught the scent of something that shouldn't be there. Silver. And underneath it, the metallic tang of drawn blood. Viktor sends his regards, Kai said, and his smile was sharp enough to cut glass. He wants you to know that Phoenix is screaming your name. As he spoke, Sera saw it, the flash of silver behind his back, the way his muscles tensed for a strike. The real Kai was gone, buried so deep under Viktor's compulsions that only the shell remained. And that shell had come to kill her. Outside, the new moon began its rise toward midnight, and through the bloodline bond, Sera felt Phoenix's agony spike as Viktor began the ritual that would reshape the world in his image. Time was running out, and the man she loved was raising a silver blade aimed at her heart. If you are enjoying this video, do well to like and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Chapter 7. The silver blade caught the moonlight as it arced toward Sera's heart. She moved on pure instinct, her hybrid speed allowing her to twist away just as the weapon whispered past her ribs. The blade that should have killed her instead opened a shallow cut along her side, painful but not fatal. Kai, stop, she gasped, stumbling backward as he turned to face her again. I know you're still in there. Fight this. But the man advancing on her wore only the shell of her mate. His forest green eyes were flat and cold, devoid of the warmth that had made her fall in love with him. When he smiled, it was Viktor's expression on Kai's beloved face. He can hear you, you know, Kai said in a voice that carried Viktor's cruel amusement. Every word, every plea. He's screaming inside his own mind, begging me to stop. But he's weak, and I am so much stronger. Kai lunged again, moving with the fluid grace of a born predator. This time, Sera was ready. She caught his wrist as the blade descended, their supernatural strength matched as they struggled for control of the weapon. "This isn't you," she whispered, close enough to see the pain flickering behind his controlled features. "You love me. I can feel it through our bond, it's still there, buried but not broken." For a moment, something shifted in Kai's expression. The mechanical coldness wavered, replaced by anguish so profound it took Sera's breath away. "Run," he managed through gritted teeth, his voice his own for just an instant. "Please, Sera. I can't stop what I'm about to do." Then Viktor's control reasserted itself, and Kai's knee came up toward her stomach with bone-crushing force. Sera twisted away, but not fast enough to avoid the blow entirely. Pain exploded through her ribs as she hit the wall hard enough to crack the stone. "Sera." Darius's voice echoed from the doorway as the Alpha King took in the scene. Zane was already moving, dragonfire crackling around his hands as he prepared to intervene. "Don't." Sera held up a hand to stop them, even as Kai advanced again. "If you hurt him, if you do anything to damage his mind further, I might never be able to bring him back." "Then what do you propose?" Zane demanded, his restored sanity making him sharp and focused in ways he hadn't been since his rescue. "Because in case you haven't noticed, your mate is trying to kill you." Sera dodged another strike, her mind racing through possibilities. There had to be a way to reach Kai without destroying him. Some method of breaking Viktor's hold that wouldn't shatter what remained of the man she loved. Then it hit her, the solution that was so obvious and so terrifying that she almost dismissed it out of hand. "I have to go into his mind," she said, backing away as Kai stalked her with predatory patience. "Like I did accidentally when I first read Darius's memories. But this time, I do it on purpose." "Absolutely not." Darius's voice carried the absolute authority of an Alpha King. "That kind of mental intrusion requires complete vulnerability on your part. You'd have to lower every psychic defense, leave your mind wide open while you're battling Viktor's compulsions. If something goes wrong, Viktor wins anyway." Sera's voice was steadier than she felt. Through the windows, she could see the new moon reaching toward its zenith, and through her bloodline connection, she could feel Phoenix's agony spiking as Viktor began the ritual proper. "I'm out of time and out of options." Kai's next attack came without warning, a blur of silver and deadly intent that forced Sera to make her choice. Instead of dodging away, she lunged toward him, catching his face in her hands just as the blade scraped along her shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and then she dove into his mind like a swimmer plunging into dark water. The assault was immediate and overwhelming. Viktor's mental chains weren't subtle, they were brutal constructs of will and compulsion that had been hammered into Kai's psyche like iron spikes. Every thought, every emotion, every memory had been wrapped in bindings that screamed of ownership. "Mine," Viktor's presence whispered through Kai's consciousness. "He belongs to me now, little hybrid. His body, his mind, his soul, all mine to command." Like hell, Sera snarled, her hybrid nature flaring to life in this mental landscape. Here, she wasn't limited by physical form. Here, she was pure will made manifest, and her will was to save the man she loved. She began tearing at Viktor's chains, using vampire telepathy enhanced by werewolf fury and witch magic. Each binding she broke sent shockwaves through Kai's mind, and she felt him stirring beneath the layers of compulsion. "Sera?" His mental voice was weak, confused, but unmistakably his own. "How are you here? Viktor said you were dead. I'm here to bring you home." She wrapped her consciousness around his like a protective embrace, shielding him from Viktor's attempts to reassert control. "But I need you to fight with me. I need you to want to be free." "I do." His presence grew stronger, more solid. "God, Sera, the things he made me do. The things he made me think. I tried to kill you. You tried to save me. Even under his control, part of you was fighting to protect me. Sera showed him the moments during their fight when he'd hesitated, when his strikes had been just slightly off target. Your love was stronger than his hate. Around them, Viktor's mental constructs began to crumble as Sera and Kai worked together to dismantle them. But with each chain they broke, Sera felt herself growing weaker. This kind of mental battle was exhausting, and she could feel her physical body growing more vulnerable with each passing second. There's something else, Kai said as they destroyed the last of Viktor's major compulsions. The mate bond. Viktor tried to sever it completely, but he couldn't. It's what kept me sane, kept some part of me protected. But Sera, to fully break free, to make sure he can never control me again. What? We have to complete the bond. Fully and permanently. His mental presence pulsed with love and desperate hope. It means our souls will be linked forever, in this life and whatever comes after. Are you ready for that kind of commitment? The question hung between them in the space of heartbeats. Complete the mate bond now, in the middle of a psychic battle, while Viktor performed his reality-altering ritual? It should have been impossible, should have been too dangerous to even consider. But as Sera felt Viktor's power spike through her bloodline connection to Phoenix, as she sensed ancient magic beginning to tear reality apart at the edges, she realized it wasn't just about saving Kai anymore. It was about having an anchor, a connection strong enough to ground her when she had to face what was coming next. Yes, she whispered, and felt their souls reach for each other across the barriers between mind and heart. Forever. The mate bond snapped into place like a rubber band finally released, and the sensation was unlike anything Sera had ever experienced. Every wall between them crumbled, every secret was shared, every emotion became mutual property. She felt Kai's love for her like sunlight in her veins, and he felt her fierce protectiveness like armor around his heart. Viktor's remaining compulsions shattered like glass under the force of their united will. Sera gasped as she returned to her physical body, finding herself still standing in the pack house's great room with her hands on Kai's face. But now his eyes were his own again, warm, loving, and filled with the kind of devotion that made her knees weak. Sera, he breathed, and she heard 17 different kinds of love in that single word. Welcome back, she whispered, then swayed as exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. The mental battle had drained her more than she'd expected, and there was still so much left to do. The ritual, Zane said urgently from across the room. While you were saving Kai, Viktor began the main ceremony. Can you feel it? Sera could. Through her connection to Phoenix, she felt the Phoenix shifter's power being torn from her body in ribbons of fire and light. Ancient magic was awakening around Mount Grief's summit, magic older than civilization and twice as dangerous. He's trying to force the merger, she said, understanding hitting her like ice water. He's using Phoenix's flame to power a compulsion that will override our free will. Then we stop him. Kai's voice carried new strength, their completed mate bond giving him access to some of Sera's hybrid power. The three of you bond willingly, and you turn his own ritual against him. It's not that simple, Darius interjected. Phoenix is miles away, probably unconscious from the power drain. How do you propose to reach her? Sera closed her eyes, following the bloodline connection that linked her to the Phoenix shifter. Phoenix's pain was a constant ache in her chest, but underneath it was something else, a spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. She's still fighting, Sera said with growing certainty. Viktor may have her body, but he doesn't have her consent. And that's what we need, not physical presence, but willing participation. A mental bond across miles? Zane's eyebrows shot up. That's never been attempted before. The risks are irrelevant. Sera opened her eyes, and both men stepped back at what they saw there. Her hybrid nature was fully awakened now, vampire speed combining with werewolf strength and witch magic to create something unprecedented. Viktor wants to remake the world in his image. I'd rather die trying to stop him than live in whatever nightmare he creates. The bonding ritual was nothing like what Sera had expected. She'd imagined something formal, ceremonial, surrounded by ancient symbols and sacred objects. Instead, it happened in the pack house's great room with Darius and Kai standing guard while she, Zane, and Phoenix, connected across miles of mountain terrain through pure will, joined their essences in a way that transcended physical space. Phoenix's presence blazed to life in Sera's consciousness like a star being born. "About time," the Phoenix shifter said, her mental voice tight with pain but fierce with determination. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me." "Never," Sera replied, then felt Zane's dragonfire consciousness join theirs. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as anyone can be for becoming something that's never existed before," Phoenix replied. "Let's do this." The three-way bond formed gradually, like crystals growing in perfect symmetry. Sera felt Phoenix's passionate fire joining with Zane's ancient wisdom and her own hybrid versatility. But instead of losing themselves in the merger, they became more, a trinity of power held together by choice rather than compulsion, by love rather than dominance. The effect was immediate and world-changing. Every supernatural being on the planet felt it, the sudden surge of power that rewrote the fundamental laws governing their kind. Werewolves found their transformations easier, more controlled. Vampires discovered that sunlight no longer burned. Phoenix shifters felt the flame of creation pulse stronger in their veins. But Viktor felt it most of all. On Mount Grief's summit, the Shadow Pack leader screamed in fury as his carefully constructed ritual was hijacked by forces beyond his control. The power he tried to claim for himself was flowing toward the three bloodlines instead, drawn by their willing bond rather than his forced compulsion. Through her enhanced senses, Sera felt Viktor's rage like acid in her veins. But she also felt something else, his fear. For the first time since this nightmare began, Viktor Grimm was afraid. "He's losing control of the magic," Phoenix reported from her position in Viktor's ritual circle. "The power he tried to steal, it's turning against him." "Good," Sera replied grimly. "Let him choke on his own ambitions." But as Viktor's screams echoed across the mountain, something else began to happen. The ancient magic he'd awakened didn't simply dissipate, it began to consume him from within, remaking his body into something that had never been meant to exist. His human form stretched and twisted, bones lengthening into impossible configurations while his skin took on the texture of living shadow. When he spoke again, his voice carried harmonics that hurt to hear. "If I cannot have godhood," Viktor said, his words rippling with power that made reality shiver at the edges, "then you will face something far worse." Through their bond, Sera felt Phoenix's terror spike as Viktor raised his transformed hands toward the starless sky. "I call upon the ancient darkness that existed before moon and sun," he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I offer my essence, my ambition, my very existence as payment for their awakening. Let them rise and reclaim the world that was stolen from them." The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The new moon above Mount Grief flickered and went dark, not hidden by clouds but simply absent. And in the space where it should have been, something vast and hungry began to stir. Viktor's laughter followed them all the way back to the pack house, even as his body crumbled to ash and bone. But the thing he'd awakened, the ancient darkness that had slumbered since the world's creation, was just beginning to stretch its wings. The prophecy was complete, the bloodlines were bound, and Viktor Grimm was dead. But as Sera looked up at the empty sky where the moon should have been, she realized their victory might have come at the cost of everything they'd tried to save. If you are enjoying this video, do well to like and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Chapter 8. The ancient darkness descended like a living nightmare. Where the new moon had vanished, a void now pulsed with malevolent hunger, not merely the absence of light, but something that devoured illumination itself. Sera watched from the pack house steps as shadows peeled away from trees and buildings, drawn upward into the writhing mass that grew larger with each passing moment. "It's feeding on supernatural energy," Zane said grimly, his dragon senses allowing him to perceive the entity's true nature. Through their bloodline bond, Sera felt his ancient dread. Every werewolf transformation, every vampire's enhanced speed, every phoenix flame, it's all nourishment for this thing. The temperature plummeted another 10 degrees. Frost began forming on the windows despite the late summer air, and when pack members exhaled, their breath came out in visible puffs. "How long do we have?" Darius demanded, his alpha authority cutting through the growing panic among his wolves. Phoenix's voice reached them through their mental connection, strained but determined. "Not long. I can feel it pulling at my flame. It's trying to drain us from the inside out. Sera closed her eyes, extending her hybrid senses toward the consuming void above. What she found made her stomach clench with terror. The ancient darkness wasn't just hungry, it was intelligent. And it remembered a time before the moon, before the sun, when beings like her had been its primary source of sustenance. Everyone with supernatural abilities is a target, she said, opening her eyes to meet Darius's worried gaze. It won't stop until it's drained every last drop of magic from the world. Kai moved closer, their completed mate bond allowing him to sense her growing desperation. There has to be a way to fight it. Viktor was just human when he called this thing. Viktor was a catalyst, nothing more. The voice came from behind them, and they turned to see Cassandra emerging from the pack house. The Luna moved with purpose, ancient tomes floating around her in a display of power Sera had never seen her use. The ancient darkness has been waiting for someone foolish enough to break the barriers holding it back. Viktor simply provided the key. You know what this is? Darius stepped toward his mate, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. Cassandra's smile was grim. I'm older than I appear, my love. I remember the stories passed down from the first wolves, the first vampires, the first of all our kinds. This entity ruled the world before the Great Binding. What binding? Sera asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. The original prophecy wasn't about 3 bloodlines saving or destroying the world, Cassandra explained, her floating books opening to pages covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. It was about 3 bloodlines voluntarily sacrificing their enhanced power to create a permanent prison. The moon itself is that prison, and Viktor's ritual just cracked it open. The implications hit Sera like a physical blow. You're saying the only way to stop this is for Phoenix, Zane, and me to give up our abilities? Not just your enhanced abilities, Cassandra said softly. All of them. You'd return to being human, completely and permanently. The power you sacrifice would rebuild the prison, but you'd never again have vampire speed, werewolf strength, or witch magic. Silence fell over the group as the magnitude of the choice settled in. Through her bloodline connections, Sera felt Phoenix and Zane processing the same devastating revelation. Human, Phoenix whispered across the mental link. After everything we've been through, everything we've become. It's the only way, Zane replied, and Sera felt his ancient wisdom accepting what his dragon pride wanted to reject. The question is whether we're strong enough to make that sacrifice. Sera looked around at the faces surrounding her, Kai with his newly awakened protective instincts, Darius struggling with the possibility of losing his daughter again, Cassandra radiating maternal concern. These people had become her anchor, her reason for fighting. We do it, she said quietly. Sera, Kai started, but she cut him off with a gentle touch. We do it, she repeated more firmly. Phoenix, Zane, are you with me? Always, came Phoenix's immediate response. Until the end, Zane agreed. But even as they made their choice, the ancient darkness above seemed to sense their intention. The void pulsed with renewed fury, and tendrils of living shadow began descending toward the earth like the tentacles of some cosmic octopus. It won't let us complete the ritual, Darius observed, watching the approaching darkness with alpha-sharp eyes. We need to buy them time. What followed was unlike any battle Sera had ever witnessed. Every supernatural being in a 50-mile radius converged on the pack territory, drawn by an instinct older than consciousness itself. Vampires emerged from their covens, phoenix shifters descended from the mountains, dragonborn answered calls they barely understood. Even the human hunters who had been enemies mere hours ago arrived with weapons designed to fight entities beyond mortal comprehension. The alliance should have been impossible, natural enemies working side by side, predators protecting prey, ancient grudges set aside in the face of universal extinction. But as the ancient darkness's tendrils began touching the earth, turning grass to ash and trees to skeletal remains, survival became the only law that mattered. Form defensive circles around the ritual site, Darius commanded, his alpha voice carrying to every supernatural ear. Whatever happens, the 3 bloodlines must complete their sacrifice. Sera found herself at the center of a protective ring formed by beings who should have been trying to kill each other. Werewolves howled in harmony with phoenix flames, vampire speed complemented dragon fire, and human technology adapted to channel supernatural power. But the ancient darkness was relentless. Its tendrils swept through the defenders like they were paper dolls, draining life and energy with casual indifference. Sera watched friends and strangers alike fall to their knees as their supernatural abilities were torn away, leaving them gasping and mortal in the monster's wake. "We're running out of time," she called to Phoenix and Zane through their bond. "If we're going to do this, it has to be now." "Begin the sacrifice," Phoenix agreed, her mental voice tight with pain as a shadow tendril wrapped around her physical body miles away. The ritual required them to willingly release every supernatural ability they possessed, starting with the most recently acquired and working backward through their entire magical heritage. It was like performing surgery on their own souls, cutting away pieces of themselves that had become fundamental to their identity. Sera began with her hybrid enhancements, the perfect fusion of vampire, werewolf, and witch that had made her unique among their kind. As she let go of those abilities, she felt pieces of herself falling away like autumn leaves. Phoenix released her enhanced flame control, the godlike power that had let her reshape reality with a thought. Zane surrendered his ancient dragon wisdom, knowledge that had been accumulating for centuries. With each ability they sacrificed, the void above them shuddered and contracted slightly. But it also fought back harder, its tendrils reaching for them with desperate hunger. "Keep going," Kai shouted from somewhere in the defensive ring, his voice hoarse from battle. "It's working." Sera pushed deeper into the sacrifice, releasing her vampire telepathy, her werewolf transformation, her witch magic. Each loss felt like having a limb amputated, but she pressed on, driven by love for the people fighting to protect her. Phoenix gave up her phoenix rebirth cycle, the immortality that had defined her species for millennia. Zane released his dragon flight, his enhanced strength, his connection to elemental forces. But as they approached the core of their supernatural nature, the fundamental spark that made them more than human, the ancient darkness made its final, desperate assault. Reality itself seemed to tear as the entity abandoned subtlety for raw power. The ground cracked beneath their feet, the air became thick as honey, and time stuttered like a broken clock. In that moment of cosmic chaos, Sera felt their defensive circle wavering. Darius was on his knees, his alpha strength nearly drained. Kai was bleeding from wounds that wouldn't heal, his werewolf regeneration stolen by the entity's touch. They weren't going to make it. The realization hit her like ice water, and for a heartbeat, despair threatened to overwhelm her resolve. They had come so far, sacrificed so much, only to fail at the final moment. Then Cassandra's voice cut through the chaos like a silver bell. "The bonds of love," she called out, her words somehow carrying over the ancient darkness's roar. The prophecy spoke of bonds stronger than blood or magic. "Love, Sera. Let love be your anchor." And suddenly, Sera understood. The sacrifice wasn't just about giving up power, it was about what you chose to keep instead. As she released the last of her supernatural abilities, letting go of vampire strength and werewolf senses and witch magic, she didn't become empty. She became something else entirely. She became someone who chose love over power, connection over control, community over conquest. Phoenix and Zane made the same choice in the same moment, their bond with Sera and with all the people fighting to protect them becoming the foundation for something the ancient darkness couldn't understand or devour. The entity had fed on supernatural power for eons, but it had never encountered pure, willing love freely given. The explosion of light that followed their final sacrifice was visible for hundreds of miles. The ancient darkness shrieked as reality reasserted itself, as the moon returned to the sky blazing brighter than ever before, as the entity found itself once again imprisoned behind barriers stronger than before. When the light faded, Sera found herself lying on grass that had grown green and healthy again, surrounded by people who were battered but alive. She tried to reach for her vampire speed, her werewolf strength, any of the abilities that had defined her for so long. Nothing. She was completely, utterly, perfectly human. "Sera?" Kai's voice was worried as he knelt beside her, and when she looked up at his face, she saw he was human too. The Shadow Pack's corruption had been burned away along with his supernatural nature. "I'm okay," she said, meaning it more than she'd ever meant anything in her life. Are you? His answer was a kiss that tasted of hope and new beginnings. Around them, the supernatural world began to stir back to life. Those who had lost their abilities to the ancient darkness found them slowly returning as the entity's influence faded. But Sera, Phoenix, and Zane remained human, the price they'd willingly paid for everyone else's freedom. Any regrets? Phoenix asked, helping Zane to his feet as the three bloodlines found each other in the aftermath. Sera looked around at the faces surrounding them, Darius, proud and relieved, Cassandra, glowing with maternal warmth, Kai, whose love for her had never depended on her supernatural nature. None, she said honestly. 6 months later. The mating ceremony took place under a full moon that seemed to shine with unusual brightness, as if celebrating the love it had helped preserve. Sera wore Elena's moonstone pendant, now simply a beautiful piece of jewelry rather than a magical artifact, and Kai's eyes reflected the silver light as they spoke their vows. I promise to love you whether you're human or hybrid, he said, his hands steady as he placed the mating bracelet on her wrist. Whether you have supernatural speed or can barely keep up with me on morning runs. Sera laughed, the sound carrying across the pack territory to where friends and family had gathered to celebrate. I promise to protect you and our pack with whatever strength I have, she replied. Even if that strength is purely human. Darius officiated the ceremony with the proud bearing of an Alpha King who had gained a daughter and was about to gain a son. When he declared them fully mated, the pack's howls of celebration seemed to make the moon itself smile. Later, as the party wound down and couples began drifting toward their homes, Sera found herself standing beside Cassandra near the ceremonial altar. You know, the Luna said quietly, one hand resting on her slightly rounded belly, there's something I need to tell you. Sera felt a flutter of anticipation. The baby? The baby carries unusual magic, Cassandra confirmed, her voice soft with wonder and worry. Elena's journal had one more secret, the prophecy wasn't about destroying or saving the world once. It was about creating guardians for the next cycle. The next cycle? The ancient darkness will return eventually, Cassandra explained. Not in our lifetime, perhaps not for generations. But when it does, the world will need protectors who understand the true power of willing sacrifice. Sera processed this information, then smiled. Then we'll make sure they're ready. Across the ceremonial ground, Phoenix and Zane were deep in conversation with a group of young supernatural beings who had come to witness the ceremony. Though Phoenix could no longer control flames and Zane could no longer transform into his dragon form, they had found new purpose in teaching the next generation about the power of unity. Kai appeared at Sera's side, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. What are you thinking about? He murmured against her ear. The future, she said, leaning back against his chest. About the children who'll grow up in the world we helped save. Including ours? His voice carried a note of hope that made her heart skip. Especially ours. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the moon travel its ancient path across the star-filled sky. Sera thought about the girl who had fled through the forest 6 months ago, terrified and alone, believing she had lost everything. That girl couldn't have imagined standing here now, human but not powerless, surrounded by family, looking forward to a future filled with possibility rather than running from a past filled with pain. The moon would rise again tomorrow night, and the night after that, and for all the nights to come. And when the darkness inevitably returned, there would be guardians ready to face it. But for now, there was love, and laughter, and the simple miracle of being exactly who she was meant to be. The moon will rise again, she whispered, echoing words from Elena's journal that had taken on new meaning. And we'll be ready, Kai finished, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a man who had found his purpose in protecting the woman he loved and the pack they called home. Above them, the moon shone down on a world rebuilt through sacrifice and sustained by love, and in its silver light, anything seemed possible. Since you've made it this far, I know you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories like this. I would also love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. Please share this video with family and friends.